Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Coffee Chatter. To start off today, I'd like to start off with a very interesting talker. Those of you that know me know that I rarely speak up when it comes to current events or politics, simply because I know it can become quite controversial and starts fights and discussions. But the church shooting in South Carolina really affected me, and I feel I must cover this in this week's show. I'm throwing myself under the bus yet again with this opener, but I feel it needs to be said, and therefore I will say it. Whether you agree or disagree doesn't matter. Just putting that out there. However, I do wish to hear your comments, so please. Anyway, a man who was clearly in some form of mental anguish sat in this AME church in Charleston, South Carolina, for a whole hour. He clearly was not African American, but the members of this church welcomed him with open arms, even if some had doubts. Why? Because as Christians, we are supposed to treat every single person we meet as if they were a child of Jesus. Whether or not this man believes in God or attends church regularly is not the point. We are to still welcome them as these church members did. Their reward, however, in this case, was not an ending anybody saw coming. Towards the end of the service, this anguished man shot and killed 9 innocent church members, including Cynthia Hurd, age 54, Susie Jackson, aged 87, Ethel Lance, age 70, the Reverend DePayne Middleton Doctor, age 49, the Honorable Reverend Clementa Pickney, age 41, Twanenza Sanders, age 26, Reverend Daniel Simons Sr., age 74, Reverend Shakonda Singleton, age 45, and Myra Thompson, age 59. Along with their lessons of how to treat others, we can also learn from their message of forgiveness. Many of these deceased church members had family members publicly say they have forgiven the person who killed their loved one. Many of us do not see how this is possible. We're not even sure we could do that if we were in their position. And that is because when we hear the word forgiveness, we think it means that it pardons what they did and it makes it acceptable. That's not the case. It is what faith does to us, if they have it. While they will never forget what they lost or who they lost or what happened or what evil act he committed, they are able to openly forgive the person, knowing that he will get his judgment from God upon his own death. A few days after the shooting, thousands of people filled the bridge that leads to the church. Not only people of that church, but the community of Charleston, and even some from neighboring communities and even states. That was a beautiful sight to see on the news. People of various faiths, nationalities, and communities coming together to support the Charleston community. But the one thing that bothers me about this case is that politicians and the media are using it for ratings. One presidential candidate, who shall remain nameless, actually called it an accident during a public event. This was no accident. It was an unfortunate tragedy, and too many mainstream media stations, Fox and CNN specifically, are using it for their ratings, covering it constantly, and only covering it with their opinion involved, and not as an objective view, which is how all journalists are supposed to view news stories. Do I support stricter gun laws? Well, absolutely. But is it the gun that committed the crime? No. If people blame the physical gun for this unfortunate event, then you also need to blame the pencil or the pen for failing an exam, and the hamburger for making somebody fat. It is not the object, it is the person. Similar to the Catholic saying, hate the sin, not the sinner, this case is similar. We are to work on who can hold a gun and not get rid of guns completely. I feel that guns are an excellent safety measure for those who live or work in unsafe communities. But when placed into the hands of someone with a mental illness or someone who has a previous criminal record, that is when it becomes dangerous, and we need to fix that. I commend those presidential candidates who realize this thought, but they need to do so with the memory of the 9 innocent victims involved in this tragedy, and not focus solely on the person who committed this evil crime. He was sick. People like him are the ones that need to be thoroughly checked with background and criminal record checks, as well as make sure he is mentally stable. Before being allowed the liberty of having a gun, because that is what a gun is a liberty, it's an option that not everybody should have, just like voting. Some people have no clue how to take voting seriously. They think it's just a joke. And the same thing with guns, and it's not. It is not the gun that needs to get off the streets, but rather those who should not be given the right to use that gun. With that being said, we shall move on to cold case section. This week we're in Oregon. At approximately 6:40 a.m. on December 31st of 2003, individuals delivering newspapers heard multiple gunshots in the area of North Missouri Avenue and North Mason Street. Shortly after, they discovered the victim, 16-year-old African-American male Aaron Prazid King, shot in the alley between North Missouri and North Michigan Avenues, just south of North Mason Street. Mr. Prad King was transported to a nearby hospital, where he later died from his injuries on the morning of January 2nd, 2004. So it's actually 2004, not 2013. Sorry. Witnesses reported seeing an unidentified individual wearing dark clothing run east on North Shaver across Michigan Avenue shortly after hearing the gunshots. The cold case unit would like anyone with information regarding this case to contact them. Witnesses may contact Cold Case Homicide Unit investigators directly at 503-823-0400. To remain anonymous, witnesses may provide information through the Crime Stoppers Oregon, which is available on the Oregon website. Crime Stoppers is offering a cash reward of up to $1,000 for information reported to Crime Stoppers that leads to an arrest in this case, or any unsolved felony, and tipsters can remain anonymous. Also, just for any crime, not just in Oregon, but any crime, this is just a reminder, information learned from social media sites such as Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube should be shared with investigators, as these tips may lead to the identification of a suspect or suspects. On to Review Corner. There's just a movie review, but it's a very poignant movie. The Magdalene Sisters. Sunday night was my designated movie night for last week, and I searched the Comcast channel guide for any good movies but found none. So, being that I now have a smartphone, I decided to search for a movie to watch on there and discovered The Magdalene Sisters. This is a true story that follows 4 young women, Magdalene, Rose, Bernadette, and Christine, who meet and befriend each other while patients at one of Ireland's asylums. Magdalene is reclaimed by a family member and released, while Rose, Bernadette, and Christine remain. Christine is then taken away after a rage during a public event and numerous suicide attempts, and is institutionalized in a more secure asylum. Rose and Bernadette escape in the middle of the night, after locking the nuns in a room as they try to capture them from leaving. The end of the movie shows what happened to each of the girls in real life. Unfortunately, the website that I watched it from was written in French and did not come with subtitles, so I cannot include that information for you in this review. The asylum that this took place at was the last asylum in Ireland that used extreme forces of punishment upon their patients, such as whipping, and closed its doors in 1996. I highly suggest this movie to anyone who is into history, especially of the pains and torments these poor souls endured in these days. It is available on YouTube in multiple formats and did come out on DVD in 2004. Since I had such a long report on the gun situation. I have decided not to read the readings of the day. However, I will share with you from my iPhone app or my smartphone app the saints of the day, because some of these saints I did not have info on. And there's actually 3 saints that we'll talk about. The first is Saint Mother Maria Guadalupe Garcia Zagava. This holy lady was born in Zaporizhia, Mexico in 1878. Her family were committed Christians, and her father ran a religious bookshop. Her life inside the church began while she was still in her teens, and by the time she was 23, she had founded the new community of the Handmaids of St. Margaret Mary Alacoque and the Poor Maria. The sisters provided food and shelter for the needy, and spiritual guidance and education for the children, but their main duty was to provide hospital and medical care for all. The sisters were loved and respected, and the order grew rapidly. The persecution of Christians during the 25 years of the Mexican Revolution would put Maria and her sisters in grave danger. But far from wilt under the pressure, the sisters took heart from their strength and faith of their Mother Superior, and provided not just medical and spiritual help, but sanctuary for the hunted, including the Archbishop of Guadalajara. The order continued to expand, and at the time of Maria's death, there were more than 11 foundations in Mexico, and today the number has risen to almost 24. Maria is a newly canonized saint, being canonized by Pope Francis on May 12th of 2003. Our next saint is Saint Romuald. The son of an 8th century Scottish king, he gave up his position and traveled to Ireland to become a monk. After being appointed Bishop of Dublin, he was recruited by St. Wilfrid to work as a missionary on the Dutch and Belgian border. Achieving considerable success throughout the region, he was a well-respected man. He was murdered by 2 villains who objected to the holy man's attempts to convert them. Despite the fact that we have little more hard evidence of Romuald's life and works, we thought that it was important for us to remember him. And of course, the most popular saint for today is Saint John the Baptist. All Christians are aware of John the Baptist, and if you're a Christian and you haven't heard of him, well, now you know. He was the forerunner of Jesus and identified by both St. Jerome and St. Augustine of Hippo as having been sanctified in the womb. John chose a life of heroic hardship and never committed a sin. He devoted every hour of every day preparing people for the coming of the Lord. He spent his youth living as a hermit, surviving on locusts and wild honey, but such was his charisma that when he preached, huge crowds would gather and he would baptize them in the River Jordan. One day, Jesus joined the crowds on the riverbank, and John noticed a dove hovering above his head. He recognized Christ immediately and revealed him to the crowd as the Messiah and the Lamb of God. John was an outspoken man who feared nothing, and he was particularly scathing about Herod's incestuous marriage to his niece Herodias, so much so that he was arrested and imprisoned. Herod ordered a great feast to be prepared celebrating his rule, and it was agreed that his stepdaughter Salome would dance to entertain him. The king was so taken with her performance that he offered her anything her heart desired. Herodias whispered in her ear and told her to ask for the head of John the Baptist. Within hours, it was delivered on a silver platter. The martyrdom of John the Baptist has been celebrated since the 5th century and has 2 feast days, the 24th of June, which is John the Baptist's birthday, and the 29th of August, which is said to be known as the day that he was beheaded. Our prayer for today: your kingdom is already growing in me. I meet you as you spread out in me and shape the landscape of my life after your will. And today's thought of the day: heaven will be occupied only by people with heaven in their soul. And as I slowly let my prompter come forward, we will announce the fan of the week is Maurice Isabel, who once again answered correctly. The answer was 38 liters. Also, a special intention or two to keep in your heart throughout this week until you see me again next Tuesday. For those currently living in asylums across the world, especially those who are there simply because they are difficult to understand or are mentally delayed, that God keep them close to His Sacred Heart and bring gentle shepherds into their lives to give them hope. We also pray this week for those who are going through any form of identity crisis, whether it be based on gender, occupation, age, or even race. We especially remember this week Bruce or Caitlyn Jenner and Rachel Dolezal, that they may discover who they really are and get the help and support they need to live the life God made them to live. I will see you next week, and I hope God blesses you abundantly.